Chapter 1. Retiring after success. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. The wind whistled, and leaves fluttered. Lucas Gray pulled his coat together and once again looked at the campground that he had long gotten familiar with, as well as the familiar faces. He clenched his jaw tightly. Let's go. Lucas turned around and stepped onto the hatch door of the helicopter that had been waiting at the side for a long time. Behind him were teams of tall, toned, and muscular men standing uniformly in neat rows. Despite having tears in their eyes, they were standing still with their backs straight in the cold wind and raising their hands in unison to perform a standard and reverent military salute. Farewell from the assault team, Captain. Farewell from the Special Forces, Captain. Farewell from the logistics team, Captain. Amid the sounds of the helicopter's propeller continuously rotating, the loud yelling sounded consecutively. It was full of enthusiasm and pride. Captain, can you really bear to? Jordan muttered with reluctance in his eyes as he wiped his tears and closed the helicopter's hatch door. The wings of the helicopter rotated, and it ascended. The familiar campground and teams were gradually turning into tiny marks on the ground. Lucas looked away and said with a faint smile, "Everything comes to an end someday. There's no longer a need for me to continue staying here." He had stayed on this land for 6 whole years. During these 6 years, Lucas was quickly promoted from a fresh recruit to a general who held great authority after various close shaves with death. The invincible Falcon Regiment under his command firmly guarded the vast territory around the state of Calico. And Lucas became the most powerful god of war in the eyes of the tens of thousands of members of the Falcon Regiment because of his excellent command ability and combat power. No one dared to invade Calico anymore, as it was now well fortified. Having achieved success, he could finally retire, even though he was only 20.8 years old. The helicopter flew south toward the nearest airport. Lucas took out an antique pocket watch from his chest, in which was a slightly yellowed photo. It was a photo of him and a young woman taken 6 years ago. Back then, he was still slightly immature. The woman's face was beautiful, delicate, and exquisite. Her lips were pursed stubbornly, and her slanted, crystalline eyes seemed to be staring straight into Lucas's hand through the photo. The scene that seemed like a farce at that time was still fresh and vivid in his memory. Lucas smiled bitterly as he began to recall the events from 6 years ago. At that time, Cheyenne Carter, who had just graduated from college, had already established the Brilliance Corporation with her outstanding bravery and wits, thus making her a gorgeous and famous female CEO. However, her image was soon ruined. The young and beautiful CEO with a glamorous appearance actually had a disgraceful private life, as she had had an affair with the company's chauffeur. The media made a big deal out of it and released all sorts of malicious, speculative, and untrue reports. Cheyenne's image was ruined overnight, and she fell to rock bottom together with her Brilliance Corporation that was thrown into jeopardy. No one bothered to discover that the truth was that they had actually been drugged. The masses were only interested in gossip, and the Carters just wanted to cover up the scandal. In the end, the chauffeur married into the Carters and became her husband. However, the marriage did not save the image of Cheyenne and the Carters. Everyone mocked and criticized the greatest beauty of Orange County, who used to be the envy of everyone, and made remarks about the penniless chauffeur who was lucky enough to marry into a wealthy family. The penniless chauffeur was Lucas. Both of them were well aware of the truth of their marriage. Soon, Lucas quietly left for the military camp and vowed to make a name for himself so that he would be worthy of the woman who used to be favored by God. 6 years had passed, and he finally returned after achieving success. Lucas looked at the woman in the photo, his emotions mixed with inexplicable remorse and apology. He wondered how she was doing after years of being away from her. Finally back. Jordan stretched his back and looked at Lucas, who had a look of nostalgia. The two of them passed through the crowded Orange County International Airport and casually ordered some fast food at the mall outside the airport. "Captain. No, I mean, Lucas, your hometown is in Orange County, isn't it? Lucas casually nodded. It had been a long time since they left Orange County, and now that they had just returned, there were many things for them to tend to. Mommy. I want mommy. All of a sudden, a puerile and crisp crying sounded near them. Lucas stopped in his tracks. For some reason, the tender crying was tugging at his heartstrings. Lucas pushed aside the crowd and followed the sound. There was a little girl standing below a billboard near him and weeping, her face stained with tears. The girl was about 4 or 5 years old and was holding a stuffed rabbit in her arms. Her tiny face was as fine as jade, and tears were welling up in her large, dark eyes. Her small and delicate nose was sniffling because of her crying, and she looked particularly adorable and pitiful, making Lucas's heart scrunch up. In particular, she seemed bizarrely familiar to Lucas. At this moment, the girl saw Lucas as well, and she abruptly stopped crying. Her eyes full of surprise, she suddenly leaped toward Lucas and hugged his thigh. Daddy! Lucas was stunned speechless and at a complete loss for what to do. Chapter 2. Take you back to Washington, D.C. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. At the side, Jordan blinked and exclaimed, Lucas, this kid really looks like you. Since when do you have a daughter? We've never heard you mention anything about it before. Don't spout nonsense. Lucas was somewhat at a loss. It was the first time in his life that he had ever had a child hug his thigh trustingly and call him Daddy. After thinking about it, he squatted down, rubbed the little girl's hair, and said softly, I'm not your daddy. You made a mistake. Did you wander off from your parents? I'll take you to look for them. Hearing this, the little girl looked at Lucas in shock and suddenly began wailing loudly. Daddy, you're a bad guy. You don't want me anymore. Lucas was dumbfounded and at a loss. After some painstaking effort, he finally managed to cajole her and convince her to go to the service counter of the mall. Lucas informed the service staff about the little girl being lost and gave a thorough explanation before leaving the mall. When he left, the little girl was bawling her eyes out, almost causing Lucas to cave in. Unfortunately, he still had important things to deal with. Otherwise, he would have kept her company until her parents arrived. Soon after they left, a woman hurried to the service counter of the mall and hugged the weeping little girl, extremely heartbroken. Amelia, I'm sorry I'm late. There was still some lingering fear within her. Earlier, she had intended to just make a quick trip to the bathroom, but she ended up running into a troublesome client who pestered her for a long time before leaving. Over the years, she had been cherishing her daughter like she was her life. If anything happened to her daughter, she didn't dare to think about it any longer. Mommy, I saw Daddy just now. But he said that I had mistaken him for someone else. How could I be mistaken? He was Daddy, the girl exclaimed, her lips pursed and on the verge of tears. What? The woman's body suddenly stiffened. Outside the mall, 8 tall and burly bodyguards with domineering auras and clad in suits walked toward Lucas and stood still in front of him. All eyes were on them. Remaining still, Lucas raised his eyebrows. Mr. Gray. The bodyguards parted to the sides, revealing an old man and a middle-aged man behind them. The old man, whose hair and beard were white, was around 50 to 60 years old and donning an immaculate suit. He looked smart and energetic. The middle-aged man beside him was also decked out in subtly luxurious designer apparel. It was obvious that they were wealthy. The old man walked up to Lucas and kept his aged eyes fixed on him. All of a sudden, he bowed to Lucas. I'm Chad Kennedy, the chief butler of the Hutton family. I'm here to take you back to Washington, D.C. The indifferent gaze in Lucas's eyes suddenly became sharp. The Huttons. Taking me back to D.C. This must be the greatest joke ever. He grinned contemptuously. It's surprising that the prestigious and noble Huttons still remember me. I remember getting kicked out of the Hutton family together with my mother by you people 2 decades ago. You people said that I'm unworthy of being a Hutton and even warned us not to go near DC again, or else my mother and I would be taught a hard lesson. Where in DC are you taking me back to? Or is it that all the Huttons have dropped dead? Lucas's voice was full of the endless hostility and anger that he had been suppressing for years. Kennedy was speechless. Lucas's words were certainly aggressive and harsh, but he knew that the Huttons had indeed let him down back then. He let out a long sigh. No matter what, so many years have passed, and old Mr. Hutton has gotten on in his years. He just wants to spend time with his children and grandchildren. After all, you carry the blood of the Huttons. My last name is Gray, not Hutton. Lucas continued unwaveringly, if that nonsense is all you want to say to me, pardon me, but I won't entertain you. Lucas turned around to leave, but Kennedy hurriedly stopped him. Mr. Lucas, wait a minute. He grabbed a pin-locked briefcase from the middle-aged man behind him and handed it to Lucas respectfully with both hands. This is all the information and the equity transfer letter of the Stardust Corporation, which used to belong to your mother. Now, it's only right for you to take over its operations. Treat it as compensation from the Huttons. Compensation. Lucas smiled mirthlessly. The Stardust Corporation belongs to my mother in the first place. The Huttons forcefully snatched it away from her and encroached on it. Even if you didn't return it, I'd snatch it back on my own. You snatched someone else's asset, and now you're acting like you're giving it to me out of kindness. Are you still expecting me to be grateful too? How thick-skinned. Let me warn you, don't treat me like a fool, and don't provoke me ever again. Or else I'll tear your family apart. Lucas pushed the bodyguards away and left with the briefcase. Staring at his taut back, Kennedy shook his head and sighed. Ah, he's still as hot-tempered as ever. As the chief butler of the Hutton family, Chad Kennedy was well aware that the Huttons had indeed gone overboard back then. However, the situation in Washington, D.C. now was unfavorable, and he had no choice but to think of a way to repair the relationship between Lucas and the Huttons. Kennedy patted the middle-aged man on his shoulder. Ethan Sawyer, you're now one of the most prominent figures in Orange County. You ought to do something about the matter regarding Mr. Gray. The middle-aged man nodded respectfully. I managed to achieve what I have today, all thanks to you and the Hutton family. It's only right for me to do this. Don't worry. I will definitely do my best to help Mr. Gray. If there were people who knew the middle-aged man and saw him being very polite and respectful toward Kennedy, they would have definitely been astonished. Well, because he was Ethan Sawyer, the wealthiest man in Orange County and the business tycoon who owned businesses in several states. Chapter 3. I'm back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Lucas was sitting in the back seat of a car with a sullen expression. Kennedy's appearance reminded him of the past that he didn't want to remember. Back then, he was called a bastard and an illegitimate child at a tender age, and got chased out of his home together with his mother, whose assets and valuables were all seized. He had a high, persistent fever at the time. And while holding him in her arms, his mother knelt by the Huttons' doorstep and pleaded for help, only to hear them say coldly, "We don't care about the lives of those who are not one of the Huttons." Afterward, his mother moved around and brought him to Orange County, where she worked hard to make ends meet. Although life was tough, she managed to raise him to adulthood. However, his mother developed an illness and collapsed after years of toiling and living a strenuous life. At that time, Lucas had just graduated from college, and his meager wage was a drop in the bucket compared to the hefty medical bills. He swallowed his pride and tried to seek help from the Huttons, only to receive a heartless rejection and harsh mockery and criticism, which made him feel hopeless and resentful toward the Huttons. Shortly after, he and Cheyenne were drugged, thus resulting in the scandal that spread like wildfire in the entire county. The Carters requested that he marry into their family. He agreed on the condition that the Carters would lend him $50,000 for his mother's treatment. However, by the time he rushed to the hospital with the money, his mother had already passed away. At that time, Lucas was devastated and felt like a complete failure in life. He failed to save his mother and wasn't worthy of an outstanding girl like Cheyenne either. To make matters worse, the Carters often mocked him in the past. Lucas decided to leave the Carters and join the military. He swore to make a name for himself so that he could stand proudly beside Cheyenne. Now, he had returned. The car sped along the road, and he soon arrived at the Carter residence. Lucas stood outside the courtyard gate that he was familiar with and seemed rather nervous about returning home. Years ago, he left without saying goodbye, and he didn't know what Cheyenne thought of him now. Just as he was about to go up and knock on the door, he heard some boisterous laughter coming from outside. "Mr. Miller, since you're so sincere about Cheyenne, we shall be straightforward. Let's just settle on a date." Lucas was stunned. He reckoned that the voice belonged to Karen, his mother-in-law and Cheyenne's mother. "Mrs. Karen, you're being too polite. Since we're going to be a family in the future, don't be so formal. Just call me by my name." Sure, you're so young and eloquent. Cheyenne is so lucky to have met you. As her parents, we can rest assured now. However, I heard her former. You mean that good.4.nothing. It's all right. The law states that a missing person can be declared dead after being missing for 4 years. He's already disappeared for more than 6 years, so he must have died in some hellhole. If you're still worried, let's go to the court and get a certificate. In my opinion, Cheyenne is brilliant in all aspects, except that her husband, my brother-in-law, is a good.4.nothing. That piece of trash isn't your brother-in-law. From now on, your brother-in-law is Mr. Miller. When Lucas heard this, his face turned incredibly gloomy, and he couldn't tolerate it any longer. He had come back for Cheyenne, and yet he heard her family talking about her remarriage. No matter what, he had to see her to clarify. Bang! Bang! He knocked on the door. "Who is it?" "Coming." Having settled her eldest daughter's marriage with a wealthy man, Karen was in a good mood, and she opened the door with a gleeful grin. However, her expression changed dramatically when she saw the person at the door. You're not dead." Shock was written all over her face, which seemed to have paled all of a sudden. Her expression was now full of disgust and disdain. "This good.4.nothing is back." Although Lucas's appearance had changed over the years, she could still recognize him, as she would curse him in her head dozens of times each day. "I'm back, Karen," Lucas said calmly. "How could you have the cheek to come back, you wastrel? Don't act so close to me. It's Mrs. Carter. Didn't your dead mother teach you any manners?" Karen hollered, her brows furrowed and her hands on her waist. Her saliva almost landed on Lucas's face. Lucas's heart was suddenly full of fury. His mother's death would forever be a sore spot in his heart and the reason for his rebellion. He clenched his fists and repeatedly warned himself not to get physical because the woman in front of him was Cheyenne's biological mother. "What? Do you want to hit me? You're such a jinx. Of all times, you had to come back now. I bet you're bent on making life hard for us. Who's out there?" When Cheyenne's father heard the ruckus, he walked out of the living room too. When he saw Lucas's face, his eyes widened immediately, and he charged forward with a furious expression in a bid to punch Lucas. "Bastard, how dare you come back? Why didn't you die outside? Ha!" Just as his fist was about to land on Lucas's face, a hand that was as strong as an iron clamp pinched his tightly. "Old man, you must be tired of living. How dare you try to hit Lucas?" Jordan had been Lucas's subordinate for years and had long treated him as his closest kin. How could he stand by and watch him get humiliated by others? With an icy cold gaze in his eyes, he emitted a murderous aura that frightened Cheyenne's father to the point that he turned as pale as a sheet. Chapter 4. Take the money and get lost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, stand down. Lucas hollered at Jordan. This is a family affair. Go out first. Jordan reluctantly but obediently withdrew his hand, glowered at Cheyenne's parents again, and left. Cheyenne's parents were full of resentment, but they did not dare to get physical with Lucas again. Jordan's terrifying gaze intimidated them, and they even had some scruples about Lucas. However, as they looked at Lucas's cheap clothes and calm expression that was almost the same as the past, their worries vanished. I was thinking too much. A good .4. Nothing is still a good .4. Nothing. What are you doing standing at the door? Hurry up and come in, you disgraceful thing. Karen pushed the door open furiously and entered. Cheyenne's father humphed coldly, finding Lucas an eyesore. Lucas followed him and entered the house. The living room of the Carters' home was very lively at this moment, as it was crowded with more than 10 relatives. Upon sight of Lucas, who came in after Cheyenne's parents, many of them who knew who Lucas was looked puzzled. Isn't this that good .4. Nothing? Why is he suddenly back? Who? Is this the good .4. Nothing you guys mentioned just now? Didn't you say that he already died? Who knows? He's been missing for so many years. And now that Mr. Miller is going to get engaged with Cheyenne, he's come scurrying back. Who knows what thoughts he's harboring? He definitely has evil intentions. Lucas glanced at the people around him, some of whom used to mock him and some of whom he hadn't met before. The most striking one was a young man sitting in the center of the couch and gaining the attention of everyone. He looked around his mid to late 20s and was dressed fashionably, his hair gelled back and his under-eye bags slightly puffy. He was obviously an avid drinker and a lustful person. He reckoned that he was Mr. Miller, the new fiancé that the Carters chose for Cheyenne, whom everyone else was talking about. Lucas secretly sneered. They're treating this piece of trash like a treasure. However, Cheyenne was not in the living room, and that made Lucas, who wanted to see her, feel slightly disappointed. Visibly annoyed, Karen said, "Okay, we can't be bothered to talk to you either. The point of today's meeting is regarding Mr. Miller and Cheyenne's marriage anyway. You came at the right time. This saves us the hassle of getting your death certificate from the courts. When Cheyenne comes home, immediately go get a divorce with her." Lucas did not utter a single word. This group of relatives gathered here suddenly began mocking him sarcastically. What? You don't want to get a divorce? Of course he doesn't. It wasn't easy for him to marry the greatest beauty of Orange County and form ties with the Carters. Of course, he's going to cling tightly onto her. How shameless. Doesn't he realize that he can't hold a candle to Mr. Miller at all? He doesn't have any self-awareness. Look at how shabby he is. He's not even worthy of carrying Mr. Miller's shoes. Hurry up and make yourself scarce. Cheyenne's father knocked on the table and exclaimed, "I'll be honest. I won't let my daughter suffer together with you. What can a penniless man like you give her? If you still have a conscience, and if you're still a man, have the decency and self-awareness to divorce her. Stop wasting Cheyenne's time and holding her back." Lucas closed his eyes and looked unusually composed. "If Cheyenne doesn't want to be with me any longer, she can let me know herself, and I'll divorce her without another word. But you people have no right to make arrangements for us," he barked sneeringly as he stared at the people around him. "What? This loser says we have no right." Just as they were about to lose their temper, someone burst into laughter, stopping them from talking. Mr. Miller seems to be about to say something. Of course, we have to wait for him to finish. Seth Miller was snuggled up on the couch, fiddling with his Patek Philippe watch and large ring while sizing Lucas up. You must be that someone, right? What have you been doing these past few years? Lucas said indifferently, I was just getting by. Seth chuckled again and clapped his hands as he stood up. I suggest you don't force me to deal with you the hard way. Cheyenne isn't someone a wimp like you deserves. Even a fool knows why you're clinging to the Carters. He took out a check from his pocket. Here's a check for $30,000. It's enough to support you for several years. Be smart, take it, and get lost, lest you end up with nothing in the end, Seth threatened. Lucas reached out to take the check while the others watched in contempt. Indeed, he just wants money. A loser is a loser. You've probably never had so much money all your life, huh? Mr. Miller just had to wave his hand, and this piece of trash took the money readily. TSK. A crisp sound filled the air, immediately making everyone stop their mockery as they looked at Lucas in disbelief. This good for nothing tore the check. He tore the $30,000 check. Is he out of his mind? Everyone watched in disbelief as Lucas gently tossed the ripped pieces of the torn check. Seth Miller, you're just an outsider. You don't have the right to interfere in our affairs. Chapter 5. Meeting again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, you. Seth immediately flew into a rage. No one had ever dared to be so arrogant toward him. The Carters were just as furious as him as they angrily charged forward to surround Lucas, as though they were going to hit him. Just as the conflict was getting heated, someone pushed the door open and entered. What's going on? Lucas's heart palpitated, and his body stiffened. He had never dared to forget that familiar voice, which was already deeply etched in his mind. He stood still in place without turning around. He had imagined and even rehearsed the scene of meeting Cheyenne again countless times in his head. This time, he was here specifically to see her too. But when he heard her gentle voice, Lucas suddenly realized that he didn't know how he should face her. What should I say to her? However, Cheyenne didn't quite notice Lucas, who had his back facing the door. As soon as she entered, she saw a large group of her relatives gathered together and surrounding Seth Miller. Cheyenne's eyebrows furrowed. Lately, Seth had been declaring his love for her and resorting to all sorts of harassment, annoying her to no end. Just now, she saw Seth's extremely flashy sports car parked near the entrance of her home. Why are you here again? I've already said that I won't consider it, Cheyenne rebuked, looking upset. Watch your tone with Seth. Karen reprimanded before hurriedly saying, it's good that you're back. Since the courts are still open, hurry up and get a divorce with this good for nothing. What? Cheyenne was feeling confused when the little girl beside her leaped toward Lucas with glistening eyes. Daddy! Daddy, are you here to see me? Daddy! Bewildered, Cheyenne shifted her gaze onto the back of the person whom she had neglected. This familiar height and silhouette. She came to a sudden realization and took a step back. It's him. Lucas squatted down, reached out, and wrapped his arm around the little girl, who was once again enthusiastically holding onto his thigh. He scrutinized her carefully. She had thin eyebrows, beautiful glowing eyes, and tiny diamond-shaped lips. She was obviously beautiful even though her features had yet to develop fully. So this kid is a Carter. It turned out that he found her strangely familiar because her features were similar to Cheyenne's. Could she be? As he thought of a certain possibility, his heart pounded vigorously. Holding the little girl in his arms, he suddenly felt very close and affectionate with her. He then took a deep breath, turned around, and looked at the person in front of him, whom he had thought about countless times. Cheyenne's long hair was draped over her shoulders, and she was dressed in a light gray bespoke business suit, with shock and puzzlement all over her face. Her beautiful eyes were fixed on the person in front of her. He was no longer the fresh graduate from 6 years ago. Although the man in front of her had the same features, he no longer looked young. His face had become chiseled, making him look much more mature and reliable. Her expression quickly changed from shock to composure. But beneath her composure, there was some anger brewing. Her chest was heaving up and down, and her fingernails were digging into the flesh of her palm. Cheyenne, why did you come back? Cheyenne interrupted. She said agitatedly in a hoarse voice, after doing that, you left without saying anything. We thought you were dead all this time. What are you back now for? She kept her eyes glued on Lucas with hatred. Back then, the two of them were drugged in a hotel, and it became a scandal that broke out overnight. For the sake of covering things up, the Carters let him marry Cheyenne hastily. Although the two did not have feelings at that time, Cheyenne decided to spend the rest of her life with him since what was done could not be undone. However, she never expected him to steal $50,000 from her father and then vanish without a trace soon after they got married. He's just a thorough liar. However, she soon discovered that she was pregnant. After hesitating for a long time, she decided to keep the baby. But she did not expect her company to encounter crisis after crisis during the toughest stage of her pregnancy. She was so infuriated that she went into premature labor while someone took advantage and encroached on the Brilliance Corporation. Whenever Cheyenne thought about the hardship and grievances that she suffered during that time, she felt immense heartache and extreme hatred for the irresponsible and horrendous man who had left without saying goodbye. Are you back to jeopardize my life again? What have I done to make you hate me so much that you want to ruin me again and again? With hatred in her heart, her eyes seemed to be burning with anger as they turned bloodshot. Although she didn't cry, Lucas was heartbroken to see her like this. When he left without saying goodbye back then, he had indeed hurt Cheyenne tremendously, and that was something that he would never be able to make up for no matter what he did. I'm very sorry. Filled with immense guilt, this was the only thing he could say even though he knew that his words were useless. Sensing the tension in the house, the little girl hugged Lucas's neck tightly and shouted, "Mommy." Cheyenne closed her eyes and tried to calm herself down because she didn't want to scare her precious daughter. Why did you leave back then? I left because I want to become deserving enough to be your husband. This was truly what Lucas felt. Even though he had good intentions, the way he handled the matter was indeed inappropriate. Cheyenne sneered, not believing him at all. So, why did you steal my father's money before you left? What money? Lucas was stunned and confused. Chapter 6. My daughter, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, don't bother arguing. Karen immediately screeched. You were penniless and had nothing to your name back then. We were kind enough to let you marry into our family and provided you with food and a roof over your head. Yet you stole our money when we let our guards down and absconded. Lucas frowned and frantically explained when he thought of something, no such thing. Back then, I did borrow $50,000 from William. But I returned it on the same night. Nonsense. You clearly stole it. Karen interjected harshly before turning to look at Cheyenne's father, William. Tell us. Did you lend him the money, or did he steal it? Humph, he married into our family, so why would I lend him $50,000? He obviously stole it and then fled. William insisted. There's such a thing. You're being too nice to him. If I were in your place, I would have long sued him and put him behind bars. Exactly. I only found out about this today. This person is trash. He stole $50,000, yet he still has the cheek to come back. Gosh, he's too shameless. Quickly, get a divorce. If he dares not to divorce, we'll sue him. The relatives of the Carters were flabbergasted. Lucas sneered in his head. This couple actually fabricated a lie to frame me and accuse me of absconding with their money. Seems like they're out to ruin my reputation before chasing me out. If I really stole so much money from you, why didn't you say anything or file a police report after I left? Lucas looked Cheyenne's parents straight in the eye. Having stayed in the military camp for years, he had developed a menacing aura that was so domineering that the two dared not to make eye contact with him and instead shifted their gazes away. Well, we just don't want to air our dirty laundry in public. We helped save your reputation, but you're blaming us instead, you good. For nothing, William roared, but it was clear that he wasn't that confident. I believe you all know the truth in your hearts. Lucas didn't say anything else. Trying to threaten me with something fabricated. Impossible. Cheyenne looked at their reactions. Having been brainwashed and fed lies about Lucas absconding with her father's money by her parents for years, Cheyenne had already begun to suspect something. Is it possible that he really didn't flee after stealing the money back then? In short, hurry up and get lost. Karen rushed forward to knock Lucas forcefully. Lucas swayed from the impact while the little girl in his arms was frightened to tears by her ferocious and menacing gaze. She hugged Lucas's neck and bawled loudly. No. I want Daddy. Don't chase Daddy away. Karen chided furiously, how is this good? For nothing your father. What are you crying for? Keep crying, and I'll lock you in the attic. The frightened little girl shivered violently in fear and burped as she sobbed, not daring to cry again, her eyes full of terror. Judging from her reaction, she must have been locked in the attic before. As anger surged in his heart, Lucas glared daggers at everyone with an icy cold gaze that seemed to make the entire living room freeze. Just as Lucas was about to lose his temper uncontrollably, a pair of hands carried the little girl away from his arms. Cheyenne kissed her daughter's frightened little face. She was so heartbroken that she was on the verge of tears. Mother, the last time you locked Amelia in the attic, she was so frightened that she had a high fever for days. Why are you scaring her again now? She's still young, and you're her biological grandmother. Don't you care about her at all? I was just frustrated and said that to scare her. I'm not really going to lock her up. Seriously, it's her fault for being so biased toward her father at such a young age. Karen muttered. Her voice got extremely soft at the end, but Lucas had sensitive hearing and immediately grasped the keyword. O.org. His heart was thumping fast, and he felt a lump in his throat. Trying to verify something, he asked Cheyenne, she is Amelia our daughter? Cheyenne bit her lips tightly. She wanted to shake her head and deny it. But when she saw the expectant gaze in the eyes of her daughter in her arms, she couldn't bring herself to say no. Amelia had been clamoring for her father, and Lucas was indeed her biological father. She nodded with a complicated expression. Now that his vague suspicion had been confirmed, Lucas was inexplicably agitated. He didn't expect the child who had pounced on him and called him Daddy during their first meeting at the airport to be his flesh and blood. The power of genetics is so amazing. Lucas looked at Cheyenne and Amelia with a tender gaze that contained a tinge of remorse. He owed them too much. Lucas curbed his urge to go up and pull them into his arms. He nodded solemnly and promised, don't worry. Since I've come back, I won't let you two down again. At the side, Karen rolled her eyes and exclaimed, talk is cheap. You're a penniless man who has nothing. You shamelessly came back, and you still want us to feed you. Dream on. She poked Cheyenne's arm forcefully, looking like she was expecting better from her. I'm telling you, go and divorce this good. For nothing later. Seth has already said that he'll get engaged to you on an auspicious date in the next few days. Do you hear me? Lucas's eyes were full of fury, and the temperature around him seemed to plunge several degrees. Chapter 7. Pink Diamond Pendant. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Karen's presumptuous behavior made Cheyenne feel very uncomfortable. Mother, I've already told you several times that I won't marry Mr. Miller. She turned to look at Seth. Mr. Miller, you come from a privileged family, and there are many girls who like you. I'm already married, and I really don't deserve you, so you shouldn't waste any more time on me. Karen was so infuriated that she pinched Cheyenne several times and barked, "Why are you so muddled? Seth is such an eligible man. You're lucky he fancies you." Then she turned to apologize to Seth. "Seth, we've spoiled Cheyenne rotten. Sometimes she's thick in the head, so please don't mind her. Don't worry. I have the final say in this household." Seth smiled faintly and pretended to be nonchalant. "It's all right, Karen. I believe that Cheyenne will believe in my sincerity one day." However, he was extremely displeased. "I, Seth Miller, have never been blatantly rejected by a woman before. She's just a married woman. Why is she being so pretentious? She seriously doesn't know any better. When I win her heart, I'll certainly make her obey me." He didn't bother taking a single glance at Lucas. To him, Lucas was just Cheyenne's in.name husband and simply an insignificant nobody. Lucas squinted. "How dare he try to court my wife in front of me? Very brazen, eh? Mr. Miller is so magnanimous and gentlemanly." Of course, the J.W. Corporation belonging to the Millers is one of the top few major enterprises of the county, and Mr. Miller graduated from an overseas college. He's well educated and has a good upbringing. How can someone here hold a candle to him? From now on, Mr. Miller will be part of our family. We have to learn from him. The Carters' relatives praised Seth incessantly, as though Cheyenne had already married him. Cheyenne frowned and felt even more infuriated and disappointed when she saw how indifferent and unaffected Lucas was as he stood by the side. However, she didn't know that Lucas just didn't want to start an argument with her family in front of her because he didn't want to put her in a difficult spot. Okay, get ready for dinner." Seeing that it was about time, Karen instructed the servants to serve the dishes and arranged for everyone to be seated. But she deliberately alienated Lucas and pretended as though he didn't exist. Everyone laughed maliciously, waiting to see this loser Lucas embarrass himself. "Daddy, come sit here." Amelia's puerile voice was heavenly, and her smile was sweet. She occupied a seat beside her stool and called out to Lucas. Lucas's heart melted a little, as his daughter's obedience and reliance on him made his frustration vanish. What are you doing? This seat is reserved for your aunt. If you like that piece of trash so much, get down and stand with him." Karen rebuked as she picked Amelia up from the stool before tossing the stool onto the ground. Amelia felt aggrieved, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Mother, consider the occasion today." Cheyenne picked her daughter up and placed her on her lap heartbrokenly before glancing at Lucas. She said sternly, "Sit down." Just as everyone sat down at the table, Seth chuckled. "I almost forgot. I haven't wished our little birthday girl a happy birthday." He took out a beautiful gift box and handed it over. "I hope the little beauty Amelia will like this." Lucas was stunned. "So it's my daughter's birthday today. I've failed as a father." His heart was full of guilt. Amelia thanked him politely and opened the gift box under her relative's encouragement. A pinkish-purple gemstone pendant glistened under the light, dazzling dreamily. "Wow! This is beautiful." The women present couldn't help but gasp in amazement. All women were interested in jewelry, especially such a beautiful and alluring gemstone. Seth smiled smugly. "This is a gemstone I obtained by chance. The pink natural gemstone in the middle is the rarest. After knowing that Amelia's birthday was coming, I specially hired the most renowned jewelry designer in Italy to make it. Pink diamond. I've never seen one before. It's so beautiful. Oh my God. It's such a big natural pink diamond. It must be worth a lot of money. That goes without saying. Mr. Miller's gift will never be cheap." It should cost at least $15,000. Seth enjoyed listening to the compliments of the crowd but still remained reserved on the surface. Not at all. It only cost about $150,000. Oh my God. $150,000. Everyone inhaled sharply. They were astonished. It's just a gift for a child, but it costs $150,000. Mr. Miller is indeed very generous. Amelia is so lucky to have such a good father who will dote on her in the future. Cheyenne's eyes were full of annoyance. Here they go again. These people just love jumping to conclusions on their own. When did I ever say that I was going to marry Seth? Mr. Miller has given her such an expensive gift. What about you? Surely you didn't come empty-handed, did you? Cheyenne's younger sister Charlotte suddenly asked with raised brows. The eyes of the crowd immediately focused on Lucas. They were obviously not expecting anything. Instead, they were excited to see him make a fool out of himself. What gift can this good-for-nothing give? He will probably never be able to afford a gift as expensive as the pink diamond Seth gave. Chapter 8. What is your agenda? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Lucas had only just learned that Amelia was his daughter, so how could he have prepared a present in advance? However, he didn't panic. Instead, he removed a bead bracelet from his wrist and handed it to Amelia. Happy birthday, Amelia. Daddy wishes for you to grow up safely and happily. Lucas obtained that moonstone bracelet at the border, and his superiors gave it to him as a reward. It looked ordinary, but it was a rare treasure. Charlotte reached out and snatched the bead bracelet. After taking a glance at it, she snorted with laughter. Your gift is so shabby. Seth gave her a rare gemstone, and yet you, her biological father, gave her a lousy bracelet. Do you really have the cheek to give it to her? Everyone craned their necks and looked over, only to be amused when they finally took a clear glimpse. This bead bracelet is made of some lousy white wood. It's so light, and every bead looks stained with dirt. It's obviously a poor quality bracelet that no one would buy even at a dollar store. Everyone burst into laughter, and despite her tender age, Amelia could sense the mockery in their laughter. Amelia snatched the bracelet away from Charlotte and held it close to her chest. She shouted angrily, I like this one. I like anything that Daddy gives me. Lucas's heart warmed, and he touched her head affectionately. He then put the bracelet on her slender and tender wrist. Fiddling with the fine, white, and light beads on her wrist, Amelia happily raised her arm and showed it to Cheyenne. Mommy, isn't it pretty? You're treating Lousy Wood like a treasure. Karen pursed her lips disdainfully. She grabbed the dazzling pink diamond pendant Seth gave, placed it on Amelia's neck, and then nagged, Amelia, you're young, so you have no clue. But I'm telling you, this pendant is the good stuff. Lucas suddenly reached out to stop Karen and snatched away the pendant before retreating far away from Amelia. What are you doing? Are you committing a robbery? Karen immediately snapped in a high-pitched voice as she glared at Lucas. Lucas sneered silently and tightened his grip, crushing the exquisite and beautiful gemstone pendant in his hand. Ah! What are you doing? Karen screamed and was on the verge of passing out. That's a precious gemstone worth more than $150,000. BDNVL.M. What has that bastard done? The 10-odd people around them were stunned speechless as their cups and chopsticks fell on the table and the ground. A precious gemstone pendant worth more than $150,000 has been crushed into bits. This good-for-nothing is really brazen. Seth's expression was incredibly sullen. It was one thing for the pendant to be ruined, but Lucas's action was a huge insult to him. With a furious expression and anger in him, he asked, What do you mean by doing that? Your gift isn't good. Amelia can't wear it, Lucas said indifferently. You. Seth suddenly sprang up and snapped, "You're a damned pauper. What do you know? Have you ever seen anything good?" His eyes were full of contempt. "I haven't seen many good things, but I can identify counterfeit goods," Lucas said casually with a drastic change of expression. "I think we all know how rare and precious natural pink diamonds are. The price of natural pink diamonds at jewelry auctions ranges from $1.5 to $4 million per carat, depending on the color. The average price of a medium-grade purplish-pink diamond like the one you gave is averagely priced at $2.5 per carat. The size of that pink diamond you gave her is no less than 2 carats, meaning that you need at least $5 million to buy it, yet you only spent $150,000. When Seth heard the word counterfeit and the figures Lucas listed in his analytical breakdown, his face had already turned hostile. However, how could he admit that he just gave his men a few $1,000s to purchase a random gemstone to fool them? He stared at Lucas furiously and seemed to be trying to pierce a hole through him with his gaze. "You're talking about prices at auctions. What if I managed to get that pink diamond at a good deal?" Lucas was not afraid of him at all, and he simply spread his palm to reveal the debris. "I'm afraid you must have made a blunder then. A real pink diamond can't be crushed by hand." Seth's face turned pale, and he was suddenly speechless. Everyone knew that diamond was the hardest naturally occurring material in the world, and it was difficult to cut. Who could crush it by hand? The people around immediately understood that the pink diamond pendant Seth gifted, which left them in envy, was a counterfeit good. Had someone else given a counterfeit gemstone as a gift, they would definitely mock him. But the person who did so now was Seth. Who would dare to laugh at him? Seeing Seth's sullen expression, they frantically tried to give him an out. "Mr. Miller isn't a professional gemstone appraiser, so it's inevitable for him to make a mistake. Why do you have to be so overbearing?" "Exactly. Besides, even if there's something wrong, it's still a beautifully designed gemstone. But you crushed it. You really went overboard. He's just trying to show how capable he is. Pushed, this loser gave a lousy wooden bead bracelet. What right does he have to criticize Seth's gift?" Lucas glanced at them coldly. "If it's just a fake gemstone, of course I wouldn't be bothered. But this thing is made of Heinrichite. You guys probably know how much radiation Heinrichite emits, right? How can you wear such a thing all the time?" He glared at everyone with a sharp gaze. Everyone was dumbfounded and speechless as they avoided his gaze. Some who had just touched the pendant were so scared that they even secretly rubbed their hands against their clothes. "So?" Lucas glanced at Seth, whose forehead was covered in sweat, and released his domineering aura. "You gave such a highly radioactive pendant to a 5-year-old. What exactly is your agenda?" Chapter 9. Expensive gift list. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Seth was so astonished by Lucas's aura that he involuntarily took a step backward. By the time he reacted, he was vexed and infuriated. He was actually frightened by a good for nothing. Although it was only for a moment, it was a huge insult. Karen yelled at Lucas, "Shut up. What do you know? Even if Mr. Miller made a mistake and bought the wrong thing, it definitely wasn't deliberate. What nonsense are you spouting about radioactivity? A loser like you knows nothing." One of the relatives with a beer belly stood up and chimed in, "Exactly. I've never heard of Heinrichite before. How can a good for nothing like you know what it is? Don't make up a name and try to fool us with it." Lucas's eyes were icy cold. Karen was Cheyenne's mother, so he couldn't humiliate her, but the other relatives were different. He walked toward the relative with a beer belly and said, "Since you're saying that I'm making up stories and that this thing is harmless, try it yourself." Lucas handed the diamond debris over and acted like he was about to rub it on the relative with the beer belly. "Stop, stop. Don't come over," the relative with the beer belly immediately wailed and retreated, knocking down several chairs in the process. The people around him retreated too as they stared at the debris in his hand with fear, as if they were staring at a ferocious beast. Chaos broke out in the hall. Enough! Amid the chaotic commotion, Cheyenne, who was currently holding her daughter in her arms silently, smashed a bowl onto the ground, giving everyone a great shock. She took a deep breath and walked up to Seth. "I'm sorry the pendant you gave Amelia was shattered. I'll compensate you for it." Seth remained gentlemanly in front of Cheyenne. Shaking his head, he said, "It's a gift for Amelia in the first place. I didn't expect it to turn into a joke because of my mistake. It's good enough that you don't blame me. How could I make you pay for it? I'll pick out another gift for Amelia to make it up to her." "Thanks, but that's not necessary," Cheyenne politely and distantly declined. Seth wanted to say something, but Cheyenne had already walked past him and went to Lucas's side. Staring at the debris on Lucas's palm, she glared at him in pique and questioned, "Why are you still holding on to it? Aren't you scared that your hand will be hurt?" Lucas grinned and obediently followed Cheyenne to the kitchen to clean up and wash his hands. Seth stared at the two figures with jealousy and resentment in his eyes. At this juncture, a modified, ostentatious, and luxurious Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon pulled over at the entrance of the Carters' home, followed by two cars. Two people alighted from the car and knocked on the door loudly. "Who is it?" Karen was extremely frustrated because of the ruckus in the living room, and the knocking on the door just made her feel even more annoyed. She initially thought that she had obtained a precious gemstone worth more than $150,000 from Seth, but it turned out to be a counterfeit. To make things worse, it was highly radioactive too. She had touched the pendant for a long time, and at this moment, she felt extremely uncomfortable. However, it would be embarrassing to wash her hands in front of Seth. It truly irked her. She opened the door in frustration and chastised, "What are you knocking for?" Before she finished speaking, she was frightened by the two bodyguards at the door, who were tall and burly like steel towers. She then fell silent. After swallowing her saliva, she asked cautiously, "Who are you looking for?" "Excuse me, is this William Carter's home?" asked a man in his 50s who looked like a butler. "Are you looking for my husband?" Hearing his name, William walked over from the living room. When he saw the person in front of him, he was astounded. "Isn't this old man in the black tuxedo Louis Alcott, the chief butler who often follows Ethan Sawyer, the richest man in Orange County, around?" Cheyenne's father hurriedly walked down the steps and bent forward with a smile. "I didn't know it was you, Mr. Alcott. I'm sorry for not welcoming you properly." Just as he was about to shake the hand of this famous chief butler, someone beside him interposed abruptly and beat him to it. Seth grinned as enthusiastically as he could. "What brings you here, Mr. Alcott?" "It's a great honor to see you here. Please quickly enter." Louis frowned. "Who are you?" "I'm Seth Miller, and my father is David Miller, who owns the JW Corporation. A few days ago, I don't know such a person." Before Seth could report his family background, Louis retracted his hand coldly and even took out a handkerchief to wipe his hand. He didn't bother looking at him at all. A second-rate company like the JW Corporation was nothing compared to the Sawyer Corporation. Seth's face was suddenly red yet pale. He originally thought he would be able to make some connections with a big shot. But in the end, he was insulted. He felt incredibly embarrassed, especially since it happened in front of the Carters, which he was trying to please. Cheyenne's father dared not speak and simply looked at Louis anxiously, wondering why this big shot was here to look for him. "Are you William Carter?" Cheyenne's father nodded his head vigorously. Louis assented and remained silent. He then took out a large wad of a gift list from his chest pocket and handed it over. Karen's eyes glistened. She hurriedly grabbed it to take a look. Moon Palace Real Estate's luxurious lakeside villa. Limited edition Lamborghini supercar. 90% shares of Venus Apparel. 90% shares of Spring Cloud Hotel. One Glorious Splendor Goldsmith branch. 9 stores in the Golden Wing International Commercial Building. As Karen looked at the items, her breathing became heavier, and she started reading the items out agitatedly. In the end, she exclaimed, "There's also a betrothal gift of $1 million. Oh my God!" She screamed, and her face was as red as a tomato as she pinched Willem's arm tightly. "Hubby, I'm not dreaming, am I?" Chapter 10. Get out of the house. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. Cheyenne's father, William Carter, winced and grimaced in pain because Karen's sharp nails were digging into his flesh. However, he couldn't whimper in pain because he felt like he was dreaming. He had his eyes peeled on the red gift list without blinking, as if the hefty gift list would fly away if he blinked. Louis instructed the 2 bodyguards to carry a large box wrapped in red silk from the car and place it in the middle of the courtyard. The crowd couldn't take their eyes off the box at all. After completing his task, Louis didn't stay any longer. But he subtly winked at Lucas, who was standing at the end of the crowd before he left. As soon as he left, the people present immediately unwrapped the box and removed the lid to reveal large wads of banknotes that were simply bedazzling, as well as a car key, title deeds, and more than 10 share certificates. Oh goodness! The items in this box are probably worth more than a few $1 million, right? Are you a fool? There's already $1 million in cash, and Moon Palace Real Estate's luxurious lakeside villa is worth several million. Look at the sports car at the door. It costs at least a couple million. There are so many shares of a goldsmith store and 9 stores at Golden Wing. Oh my God! I can't calculate it. This box is worth at least 10 million. The sounds of gasps of amazement and the gulping of saliva could be heard. They're all mine. Don't move. Seeing that someone couldn't resist reaching out to grab something, Karen pounced onto the box and glowered at each of them warily. At this moment, some relatives finally reacted and realized that the items in the box didn't belong to them. They instantly looked at Cheyenne's parents with fiery gazes in their reddened eyes, green with envy. "Uncle William, your daughter is so fortunate. I just heard that they're betrothal gifts. Have the Sawyers taken a liking to Charlotte? That's the Sawyer family, the wealthiest family in Orange County. They're so generous. Charlotte has fallen into a gold mine this time. Why didn't I give birth to such a brilliant daughter? Charlotte, when you get married into the Sawyer family in the future, don't forget to give your uncle a hand." Charlotte was so agitated that her face turned beet red. Which woman hasn't fantasized about marrying into a wealthy family? Although she wasn't sure when the scion of the Sawyers had taken a liking to her, the fact that they had generously sent such hefty gifts to her family's doorstep meant that he was very fond of her. Charlotte's face glowed with shyness and joy. Looking at her sister's shy expression, Cheyenne felt envious but happy for her. At the same time, she also felt a little bitter and melancholic, breaking Lucas's heart. He walked toward Cheyenne and said gently, "Actually, these are all for you." "What?" Cheyenne didn't hear what he said clearly because she was distracted. Standing at the side, Charlotte seemed to have heard it. She flew into a rage and shouted, "What did you say?" Charlotte grabbed the key to the sports car and a large stack of title deeds and almost threw them at Lucas's face. "Look, the Sawyers' scion has merely taken a liking to me, and yet they've already given such hefty betrothal gifts. What about you? My sister has been married to you for so many years, but have you ever given her anything? Not to mention betrothal gifts, the expenses for the wedding banquet and the invitation cards were all paid for by my family back then. If you still have some shame, hurry up and divorce my sister." Lucas was a little infuriated. He had initially prepared the things that Charlotte was holding for Cheyenne. Not only had she taken them, she even mocked him and rubbed salt into Cheyenne's wounds. He wanted to make some sarcastic remarks, but Cheyenne hurriedly stopped him. "That's enough. It's Amelia's birthday today and a joyous occasion for Charlotte. Let's continue eating. The knocked-over chairs and broken plates in the living room had been cleaned up long ago. William instructed the servants to serve a few bottles of wine, as he planned to celebrate this joyous event with his relatives. However, Seth didn't stay. He had already made a fool out of himself by gifting a counterfeit gemstone and getting exposed for it. He was also embarrassed by the hefty gifts given by Louis Alcott and the Sawyers. Thus, he was in a terrible mood and sped off in his fancy sports car. The people flattered each other, ate, and drank all the way until the afternoon. After everyone left, Cheyenne's parents called Lucas and Cheyenne to the sitting room. Lucas understood that the real show was about to begin. Cheyenne's father took a puff of his cigarette and said with an austere expression, "I'm not going to beat around the bush with you. When you got married back then, you were forced into it and had no other choice but to comply because of that incident. And there were no feelings between you two. You've been missing all these years too, and Cheyenne has been staying at home to look after Amelia, whom we are providing for. To the both of them, you're considered dispensable. Your presence doesn't matter to them, but if you're around, we have to provide for you too." Those words were harsh, but Lucas couldn't refute. He had been fighting hard in the state of Calico over the years, and although he achieved great accomplishments, he had failed as a father and a husband to Amelia and Cheyenne. "I have no excuse for what happened before. But I promise that I will treat them well in the future and fulfill my duties as a father and a husband. I won't let them suffer anymore." "Humph, trust you to have the cheek to talk about the future." Karen rolled her eyes in disdain. "What can you achieve with what you have now? How are you going to provide for my daughter and granddaughter? In the future? Are you going to continue to sponge off our family? To put it bluntly, people like you are just a burden to our family. You're just a blood-sucking leech. We're not going to provide for you, so hurry up and divorce Cheyenne and get lost."